Hello, and welcome to War of the Yokai part. Is this part 6 or 7? Uh, Part 7, yeah, right. I knew that. I was just testing you. If my audio sounds a little different, that's because I have a bootleg pop filter on my mic now. I figured, you know what, I got all these cloth masks still kind of hanging around, and I'd, pop them onto my microphone. And yeah. Okay, that's probably a little too much. Hold on. Okay, sorry about the noise. I was just changing the masks out. Figured I'd pause the recording to do that so I didn't completely deafen you. But yeah. As you can see, there's no pop. So this is a little tip for any other VTubers out there. If you don't have a pop filter, if you got cloth masks, I'm sure we all have these laying around anymore. Just if you've got like knobs on the side of your mic or some way of getting them on there, yeah, go for it. Of course, I'll have done this probably for months now because of the delay in these going up opposed to when I'm recording them. For context, I'm recording this March 10th of 2022. So, like you do. Anyway, let's get started. All right. The entry hall to the castle was equally as massive as the doors leading into it, and incredibly ornate. The architecture was a fascinating combination of Gothic, Greco-Roman, Middle Eastern, and even a faint sprinkling of Chinese here and there. Torch sconces, shaped like skeletal arms, lined the path. In their hands were ebon candles lit with blue flames that illuminated the room more than they should have. The stone beneath Usiko's feet was black and scored from centuries or more of wear, while the walls were more gray in color, less worn but still scratched here and there. Finally, at the end of the hall lay another set of large doors, these ones smaller by comparison to the ones they'd entered through, but still many times taller than even Ray. With a loud ka-thunk, the heavy wood and iron doors slowly opened, revealing a giant throne room and the master of the castle, Lord Erroneous. Just pausing real quick. Fun fact, Lord Erroneous was originally the name of the bad guy of the series that came before War of the Yokai that I was working on. I've decided to recycle the name. The more you know. Only Nonami, Lugosi, and Emiko were to be allowed in, though the rest of the team would at least be allowed to observe from the doorway. King Erroneous's form was vaporous and wispy, though still vaguely humanoid, and you couldn't seem to look directly at him without getting a headache. He was huge, easily 20 feet tall, and at least 3/4 that across. His incorporeal body was compromised of a wispy white mist surrounding a shape of more condensed black mist, both of which swirled and churned like an angry sea. Where his head would have been, there were only 2 glowing orbs of purple-blue light glowing from within the black mist. And when he spoke, his booming voice echoed through the entire castle. I'm going to spare you that effect.
Queen Maria, Lugosi, my old friend, welcome to my home. Princess Ailmea, you too are welcomed here. Please send your father my regards.
I'm trying to do some kind of Eastern European voice. My accents are not the best sometimes. The vampires bowed in respect, and Emiko knelt down. Though all present were more or less on equal footing as rulers, past, present, or future, of the monster world, Erroneous was often considered to be the greatest and most powerful player in the game due to his sway over the entirety of the spirit realm. Erroneous didn't care much. Such mortal titles were beyond beings like him. He did revel in ostentatious shows of grandeur, however, such as his massive castle that, according to legend, stretched out forever with no end. He also favored the enormous buster-type sword he kept over his throne at all times. God Bleeder, it was called, a blade allegedly so powerful and sharp that it could kill even divine beings. He had wielded it only twice. Once during the Tunguska battle at the end of the Dweller War, where he single-handedly slew 300 of them in one blow from the mighty blade, and once before, many millennia ago, when he supposedly slew several of the ancient gods of darkness, of which only Ahrimanes supposedly survived. Suffice to say, few ever tried to challenge his rule, and even fewer survived the attempt. Thank you, sire, replied Nonami reverently. We've come, as I believe you know, to seek your permission to enter the Veil Cave and prevent the witch Abigail Williams from destroying it and sending the world into complete chaos.
Yes, my queen has said as much,
he replied, and Usako found herself having to cover her ears just to block out the noise. Even just his regular speaking voice was incredibly powerful, and Usako knew she definitely didn't want to ever be around him on a bad day.
The veil, as you know, divides the human world from the spirit world. It serves on paper and in practice to keep spirits mostly in this realm and to keep humans out. It, however, has a secondary purpose.
He rose from his emerald-encrusted throne and strode across the throne room, picking up a strange stone statue and setting down for Nonami and the others to look at. Setting it down for Nonami and the others to look at. It depicted a being similar to the odd doll Abigail had retrieved from the ground in Salem, with the oblong head containing 3 triangular eyes, 5 tails, and 4 legs. This time, though, it was far more detailed. There was an odd striping pattern throughout the thing's torso, and instead of a mouth in the front of its face, it had 2 on either side. To Usako, the thing looked really disturbing, and she tried her best not to look at it for long.
It seals the dark gods out of your world, all save one, Ahrimanes. No one is quite sure why he remains on this side, while Carodis, Destros, Gortica, and Heaishan continue to be contained in their realms. Perhaps as some have mused, your world is his realm. Perhaps there is more at play. All I know for certain is this Abigail is certainly an agent of Heaishan, and that she is dangerous. You have my blessing to do whatever you must to protect both worlds.
He set the statue down and returned to his throne. As one, Nonami, Lugosi, and Emiko stood back up and bowed once more.
Thank you, old friend, came the voice of Lugosi. I promise you, these girls will not let you down. I should hope not, laughed Aronius darkly. For all our sakes.
Their task now done, the girls were escorted from the castle, all save Nonami. She had been asked to remain by Aronius, as he had a question for the vampire.
Queen Maria, are you aware that the spawn of Ahrimanes has infiltrated your team?
Nonami's expression became shocked for a moment before returning to normal. If you mean Usako, she replied, her grandmother is my sister, who joined the Dwellers a long time ago. She's not an enemy, I can assure you. It's difficult to read the expressions of a being with no face, but Nonami could tell Aronius was still troubled.
I am aware of the Takibana's status, he said carefully. It is not She who I refer to, the one with the long dark hair. I sense his darkness in her. You should be wary.
Nonami's expression turned perplexed. Long dark hair? Iris? She was the only one who could fit the description, it seemed. She couldn't be a child of Aramana's, though. She'd helped them on several occasions. Then again, perhaps that was exactly what Aramana's wanted them to think. There was too much for Nonami to give much thought to about then, but it gave her much to ponder on the way out. Outside the castle, tearful goodbyes were exchanged between parent and child before the team departed, and Lugosi had something important to tell his daughter.
Maria, know that even though I am not with you, I am always watching over you, my daughter. You make me so proud, as proud as a father could ever hope to be.
He reached out and tousled her hair as best he could.
Until we meet again, Queen Maria Lucine von Orlock.
That's the first time we ever get Nonami's middle name. Listen to me, kiddo. You got this, said Tatsuya to a somber Usako. I know this is probably your biggest fight yet, but you're a Takibana, and Takibana women are the toughest in the world, smiled Usako through the tears. Tatsuya nodded with pride. That's right, we are. Now get out there and show them what for, Usako. You can do it. Usako nodded vigorously before latching onto Tatsuya with a big hug. I promise I'll bring you back soon, Mama. Just wait for me, okay? Tatsuya smiled warmly and hugged Usako back. What she didn't say, what she couldn't, was that she was genuinely unsure if Usako and her friends could manage this. You okay, kitty? She's been exceptionally wheezy today. I'm a little worried about her. Abigail was abnormally powerful, enhanced by the energies of the dark gods to a frightening degree. She did, however, have faith in her daughter to figure out how they might beat the witch. Usako was nothing if not resourceful and stubborn, just like her old man.
October 29th.
When the team arrived at their lodgings, the first thing Usako did was take a long, hot shower. It had been almost 40 hours since her last one, and she could absolutely feel it on her skin. As she undressed and removed her prosthetic, she took a look at her shoulder nub. It looked a bit discolored, and immediately the pinkette was worried it had gotten infected while she'd been down in the Parisian catacombs. Wonderful, she mumbled, stepping away from the mirror and into the rather spacious shower. When she was done, Usako took a better look and decided to ask her roommate if she should go see someone. Oh my! Yelped Hyoka, her pale blue eyes widening. I mean, it's definitely a different color than it probably should be, but I don't know if it's infected. I would probably go ahead and get it looked at if nothing else. It can't hurt. I'll go with you tomorrow, okay? Sure thing, smiled Usako, getting into her bed and pulling the covers up tight before flicking on the TV despite not having the foggiest idea what she was watching. Do you mind? Having the TV on helps me sleep sometimes. Not at all, smiled Hyoka. I can use the ambient energy to tank up while I rest as well, come to think. The two quickly fell asleep, though the Yuki-onna would be awoken more than once by terrified screams coming from a sleeping Usako. After the second time, Hyoka decided she should probably wake her friend up just in case. Everything all right, Usako? Asked Hyoka, grabbing a glass and using her water power to fill it before handing it to the slightly trembling Usako. She accepted the glass and took a few small sips before setting it down and nodding. having the same recurring nightmare lately. It sounds silly when I say it out loud, but it's like I'm in this place. Really damn high white walls, wooden floors, narrow halls, and I'm running from something. She continued to explain the dream space she'd been trapped in, and the other rooms it turned into. When she mentioned the impossibly deep pool, Kyoka tilted her head a bit. That sounds like something I've seen before, but I can't quite place it, she said ponderously. Oh, sorry, please continue. Well, that's about it, honestly, replied Usako. Once I managed to get past the pool, found this weird and small old-fashioned room that led into this... I don't even know what. I don't even know. It was like some kind of like mining complex on an island, but it felt alien or something. I really don't know how to describe it. That does sound weird, replied Hyoka soothingly. But, I don't think there's anything to worry about, Usako. Sometimes, sometimes one dream will have a real effect on you, and maybe you'll end up having it a few more times. I think it'll probably go away soon. Hopefully. Do you need anything else? Hyoka looked up at her friend and smiled softly, extending her one good arm out towards the snow girl. I could really go for a hug, Hyo-Yo. Well, okay, smiled Hyoka back. Just remember, mine are pretty cold.
October 30th.
Breakfast the next morning was quite rushed, as Usako wanted to see the doctor as soon as she could. She didn't feel especially sick, but the last thing she wanted to risk was any more damage to her body that she couldn't fix. The girls all met downstairs in a conference room Nonami had requested use of for their breakfast meeting. All 10 girls sat around the long table. Nonami and her team, as well as Iris, Midori, Elizabeth, and Masato. The reason for the first two's presence made sense to Nonami, as each of them seemed to owe Abigail some pain. It was the latter half that made her curious. True, Elizabeth had been present for the fight in the catacombs, but she had gotten everything she needed from there and had sent the key away with her friend. Why was she still here? Then there was the enigmatic Megami Toriyama. Just who was she? Nonami decided to find out. Ms. Toriyama, while I do appreciate your aid in all of this, I must know what your stake is. You're not part of Gardna, we know that now, though Usako vouches for you just the same. That alone is the reason you're still here. With all due respect, I'd like to know why. With only a brief pause, Masato stood up from her seat and glanced over at Usako knowingly. Usako returned her look and gave her a nod. I will start by saying my name is not Megami Toriyama. It's Misato. Misato Takibana. And as ludicrous as this will sound to you, I am the daughter of Usako and Emiko Takibana, or Ayame as you know her in this timeline. A round of shocked gasps echoed around the table, save for Elizabeth, whose eyes merely went wide as dinner plates. Oh my god! I knew it! All eyes turned from Misato to where the cry of victory emanated from. Hyoka Kagari, who suddenly looked very sheepish. Well, look at her, she continued in her own defense. She's basically just Usako with an Emiko color swap. Come on! Sarah was the first to reply. I do see it, But that's not possible. They're both only 16 or so. This girl's at least what, 29? Or at least what, 19? 28, replied Masato. I just look young. Good genes. I'm from the future, if you're still wondering logistics. Those, aren't the only logistics I was wondering about, if I'm being honest, said Ray very sheepishly. Masato rolled her eyes. I'm not going to go into why I'm here right now, or how I came to be. Those aren't important to the matter at hand. Just know I can be trusted, that I am on your side. Somewhat satisfied, though now having so many more questions for the half-oni, Nonami's attention turned to a still shell-shocked Elizabeth. "That just leaves you, Elisa," she said. "What's your horse in this race?" Elizabeth rapidly shook her head to dispel the state of shock she was in, before turning her attention towards Nonami. "Full disclosure, I just don't like the bitch. Only room in these parts for one smug blonde." "Oh, is that what you call that color?" chided Iris playfully from across the table. "I thought you lost a fight with a box of highlighters." Without hesitation or mercy, Elizabeth waltzed over and pulled out her sais. For a brief second, everyone thought she was going to attack Iris, but instead, she merely held them over Iris's freshly cooked ham and eggs breakfast. For a second, the blades glowed orange, and then they went back to normal. Elizabeth returned the blades to their sheath and took her seat, smirking. "Weirdo," mumbled Iris, taking a bite out of her eggs before spitting them out. "These are ice cold! What the hell?" Elizabeth laughed heartily at that. "My blades can manipulate vibrations down to an atomic level in certain objects. I merely use them to all but cease the vibrations of your own food to cool it down. And just, if you didn't know, that's how heat works. Your atoms, your molecules just start vibrating more and more. That's what heat is. And now you've learned something." "All right, Elisa, you've made your point," called Onami in a warning tone. Elizabeth leaned back slightly in her seat, a look of smug satisfaction still etched onto her face. After that debacle, most of the rest of breakfast continued quite peacefully. At one point, Usuko mentioned how she and Hyoko were going to the nearby hospital after breakfast to get her arm looked at. "Mind if I come with ya?" asked Ray between plates of waffles being carted out by the shocked waitstaff. They had never seen anyone with an appetite like the Red Onis. I don't know, I think we'll be fine," replied Usuko. It wasn't that she didn't want Ray to come along, but the redhead was a big target, and if Abigail was nearby, she'd almost certainly see her. Still, Usuko and Ray hadn't had much of a chance to hang out in the past month or two, so... "You know what? Sure, why not? Hey, Amy-chan, you want to come too?" "Sorry, Uso-chan, I can't," she replied. Emiko and Nonami had both been poring over literature on the Veil for the past few days, hoping to figure out the best way to defend it. Their main goal was to prevent its destruction, which could only occur at the crux of 9 p.m., after which it would quickly begin to heal itself for another year or so. That Abigail only had such a small window to make her final move was both a blessing and a worry, as it would have to be something massive. The question was, what tool or power could possibly be strong enough to rend the veil itself? Even the most powerful of spirit-slaying weapons lacked the necessary power to even scratch the veil, so what was her plan? Having finished their breakfast, and saying their goodbyes for now, Usuko, Hyoka, and Ray started their journey to the nearby hospital. It wasn't a long walk, but something about it made Usuko inexplicably apprehensive. The closer they got, the more an all-encompassing sense of dread seemed to envelop her. She could even feel her bat, which she'd come to learn was the Lance of Longinus, shaking as if it too sensed something evil nearby. "Hey, you guys feel anything out of the ordinary?" she whispered as they arrived. Ray and Hyoka both shook their heads. "Not really, Usuko," replied Ray. "I mean, it's like a bit more humid here than back home, but that's it. You okay?" I think so," she sighed with a faint smile. "It's probably just my imagination. Come on, let's go." Making their way indoors, Usuko and the others had no idea they were being watched from a fourth-floor window by a rather nervous Abigail Williams. She'd seen their approach from a distance, as Ray stood out quite a bit from anyone else out for a stroll this cloudy day. The pink-haired girl next to her, if Abigail recalled correctly, had to be Usako. She'd only caught a brief glimpse of her before, but there was no mistaking that hair. How the hell had they found her? She'd been so careful to cover her tracks to a point, but then she'd certainly left a fair bit of evidence in her hotel room when she'd been assaulted by Aramanes. She'd fortunately been able to mostly restore her injured organs, but her energies had been severely depleted as a result, and so she'd opted to stay under observation until All Hallows Eve. That plan, it seemed, had been cut short by those three meddling kids and their damn chupacabra. She had to leave, and now. Even on the off chance they weren't here for her, there was a real good chance Usako could sense her, as the two were on a similar magical wavelength. Abigail could certainly sense Usako, and she was honestly a bit impressed with the sheer raw power inside the girl. A small part of her was almost terrified to see what she could be capable of someday. Almost.
Oh, excuse me.
There was no time to waste. As soon as the nurse entered the room to check Abby's vitals, the witch used her mind powers to send a mental blast into her brain and knock her out. From there, Abigail was able to hijack her body, operating it as if by remote control. She would be escorting the patient to the exit to meet with her parents, as Abigail had been smart enough to reassume her childlike form before being whisked away to the hospital. She just needed to evade Usako and the others. Down below, in one of the clinic rooms, Usako was currently having her arm nub examined by a doctor with an accent so thick it almost sounded like another language. She was really wishing she'd brought Sarah along to help translate when she felt something strange tingling on the back of her neck. It was dark, like the dread she'd felt before, but greater now and moving. Fortunately, she seemed to have gotten the information she needed from the doctor. She was fine. There was just a bit of bruising and skin irritation on the still somewhat sensitive skin. She thanked him, apologized for her abrupt departure, and rushed outside, just in time to see a nurse who was moving quite abruptly, like a puppet whose strings were being manipulated by a drunk child. Next to this odd nurse, walking as close to her as it seemed she possibly could, as if trying not to be seen, was a small, blonde-haired girl with piercing red eyes. Those crimson orbs locked with Usako's for a moment, before the girl shrieked and took off running, the zombie-like nurse falling to a heap on the ground. Oh, we're peeking a little bit. Sorry. Thinking fast. Oh, still peeking. Usako managed to catch her before her head could collide with a nearby chair, and she set her down carefully. Alerted by the scream, Rei and Hyoka were by Usako's side in seconds.
What was it?
Asked Rei.
You okay, Usako?
Yeah, answered the pinkette. It wasn't me who screamed. It was this blonde girl. She looked kind of familiar. She gave Rei a brief description, and the Oni instantly knew who it was.
Come on,
she roared, already halfway out the doors.
We gotta catch her before she gets away.
Usako nodded, taking off after Rei, with Hyoka close behind. Hyoka considered going to get the others, but Usako shook her head.
Oh my god, I keep yawning. I'm so sorry.
We might need your ice powers to freeze her in place, Yo-Yo, she explained as they ran. They pursued her for what seemed like hours through the streets and alleys of Dublin. Rei nearly grabbing her on more than one occasion, but the little witch would always have some sort of spell on hand to knock the Oni away or slip free of her grasp. Finally, though, she managed to elude them. As Rei turned a corner into what should have been a dead-end alley, Abigail was nowhere to be seen. Bellowed Rei, stomping the ground and sending large cracks spiderwebbing through the pavement.
We lost her?
Moaned Usako.
Damn it. I'm sorry, Rei. But I have some good news. I think I can sense her when she's using her magic. I figured it out while we were chasing her. I'll explain it on the way back to base.
If any of the girls present had thought to check the small manhole cover towards the back of the alley, they would have seen two thin fingers poking through, white-knuckled and holding on for dear life, as their owner dangled precariously over a river of raw sewage. Once she was absolutely certain her pursuers were gone, Abigail slowly floated up and out, setting the cover back in place. So, Tacky can... Okay, we just had a freaking error. Voice mod just kind of glitched there. Sorry about that. I mean, my microphone glitched there. What are we talking about? What's voice mod? Why is... Okay, so there was just a big old technology glitch there. VTube Studio actually, like, kind of just fucking broke. Pardon my French. Sorry. And, so I had to, like, pause the recording for a few minutes there. We're back. I'm just gonna restart that whole paragraph, if that's okay. Sorry about that. We're half an hour in. I'm not restarting this recording. So, yeah. Okay. And a one-y and a two-y and send them back to you. If any of the girls present had thought to check the small manhole cover towards the back of the alley... why did I do that? I did it again. If any of the girls present had thought to check the small manhole cover towards the back of the alley, they would have likely seen two thin fingers poking through, white-knuckled and holding on for dear life, as their owner dangled precariously over a river of raw sewage. Once she was absolutely certain her pursuers were gone, Abigail slowly floated up and out, setting the cover back in place. So Tachibana really can sense me, she muttered. Well, that's going to be a big problem. There's no time to waste. I'll need to make my move now before it's too late. She began to make her way back towards the hotel in order to retrieve her belongings, but stopped dead in her tracks. No, if they'd found her there, then they'd likely found her if they'd found her there, then they'd likely found her hotel room already, right? It was a major gamble for Abigail, as her room contained the very object she needed in order to bring down the veil. The staff of Azu-Garjig. That's not a keyboard smash at all, no. I can't risk it just yet, she muttered, slinking off towards the edge of the city. The staff may be lost to me, but it's not the only object of power I could use for this. And Tachibana will bring it right to me. Her lips curled upwards into an evil smile. What delicious irony that would be indeed. I think we're actually going to finish this part. So we're not. I think this is the last part. But we'll see. Should be, though. Aye, this is it. This is the play. Oh, October 31st. Halloween night. Aye, this is it. This is the place. This is the cave. Sarah had been the one to escort the team to the cave just before 6 p.m. Earlier in the day, they'd finalized their plan, and Usuko had made sure to mention the possibility of combining their powers to possibly entrap Abigail. She hadn't told anyone where or who she'd gotten the idea from, or from who she'd gotten the idea from, instead claiming she'd come up with it herself after some meditation. A last-minute messenger from Erroneous had informed them that only the 6 members of Nonami's Gardner unit would be allowed inside. As such, Iris, Midori, Elizabeth, and Masato had to remain at the cave's entrance. The Dhampir was relatively miffed, but given her present reputation, was a bit understanding. Upon entering the Veil Cave, Usuko found it to be exceedingly underwhelming. She hadn't known exactly what to expect coming here, and though the thought of it had conjured images of swirling purple vortexes and howling screams of the damned, she had known it probably wouldn't be anything like that. Still, even what she had reasonably expected was overkill for the sight now before her. A dirt hill maybe 20 feet tall, with what seemed to be a hand-dug tunnel maybe 3 feet high. Ray had barely managed to fit through it, and even the small-framed Nonami was on her hands and knees crawling along the ground in some places. Finally, after maybe 10 minutes of hands and knees locomotion, the team arrived into a far larger antechamber, deep under the ground. At least, Usuko assumed it had to be, because she certainly hadn't seen anything this size on the surface. Was there some non-Euclidean geometry at work here? At the back of the chamber, glowing an ephemeral green-blue, was a flat object about the size and dimensions of a flat-screen television, flickering wildly like the flashlight in the hands of a sugared-up child. From beyond it, Usuko could just make out some shapes, but they were so gaseous and fleeting that she didn't bother trying to get a good look. "Is that it? She asked, her voice echoing strangely in the oddly shaped chamber. "Aye," answered Sarah, a bit of reverence in her tone. "It may not look like much, but that there's the veil. In 3 hours it'll be all but gone for just a brief second, and the spirits will be able to come through. 'Tis a rare sight for the living to witness, indeed. Now, we need to be ready. Nanami?" "Thank you, Sarah. All right, let's go over this once more. As Usuko said, our best bet is to combine our powers. As soon as Abigail enters, Sarah will hit her with a gale force wind to knock her to the ground. Then Yoka and I will combine our powers to turn the stone walls and floor into frozen mud to keep her in place. Meanwhile, Emiko, Usuko, Rei, the 3 of you will use your abilities to completely pummel and annihilate her. I'm not one for killing, but she's already made it clear she has no compunctions about doing the same. Are we ready?" Though each girl had differing levels of confidence in the plan, it was the best they had right now. Even if it didn't kill Abigail, such an onslaught of raw energy would certainly prevent her from working whatever magic she needed to destroy the veil. "Even if it meant sacrificing our lives in the process," thought Nonami grimly. 6 girls against the fate of the world. It's a no-brainer. The first hour went by, and not a peep. The girls were getting restless, especially Rei, but each one of them was a professional by now, and was able to keep her position despite it. It was just after the second hour had passed, and Usuko was starting to wonder if they'd gotten it wrong, that the sounds of conflict and battle could be heard faintly from outside. And this next bit of the story, I'm not going to play the music because copyright, but here's the 3 tracks you'll need to be playing. The first track we'll start here is Paris from 3.0 plus 1.0, the 4th Evangelion rebuild. I love that Spanish guitar that starts it up. Elizabeth and Iris were stood out front of the cave on either side of the entrance, senses keened and on alert, while Midori lurked in the trees nearby. Masato had brought out a camouflage blanket and put it over herself as she camped out atop the hill with her sniper rifle locked in near the entrance. While ideally their goal was to delay Abigail, they were still very much going to try and bring her down themselves regardless. It was Elizabeth, her powerful Dampier eyes able to pierce through the dark easily, that first saw Abigail approaching. She was adorned in a sheer black shawl, which covered her body, though not obscuring the rather lascivious outfit she wore below. It was something that made even the fashionably daring Elizabeth blush a little bit from how little the crimson straps covered. "You must be Elizabeth Kosaka," grinned Abigail. Her smile may have seemed warm and welcoming, but the aura of sheer evil and malice radiating off of her made it quite chilling. "Why don't you just stand aside, Make it easier on yourself." Elizabeth spat on the ground to her side and pulled out her size, falling into a defensive posture. "No dice," she sneered. "Tell me why I should stand aside for a doomed weakling like you." "Weakling?" cackled Abigail humorlessly as purple-green energy crackled in her palms. "What a fool you are! I'm a god! How can you kill a god?" "What a great Got a loonies, maybe, jabbed Iris, rolling her eyes. The Charmat, you ain't. I'm genuinely shocked you got that one, replied a dumbfounded Abigail before quickly regaining her composure. Anyway, time to die. From her stance, Elizabeth had guessed Abigail was going to start off with a magic blast of some nature. Instead, she was surprised when the witch lunged at her, striking the Dompier in the face with a powerful punch that sent her skidding backwards. Fortunately, that action left Abigail wide open for a ravaging claw swipe from Iris, who descended on her like a half-feral beast and began tearing at her body. Though momentarily stunned by the sheer aggression of the assault, Abigail quickly regained her composure and sent a magically infused high kick into Iris's stomach and sent her careening away like a falling star. It was then that Midori decided it was time to step in. Literally, emerging from the woods. She walked calmly and with purpose, one foot in front of the other, arms held out low on either side with the palms open. Each hand held a glowing orb, one green, one blue, and both seemed to crackle like flame. I'm going to enjoy this far more than I should, smiled the Lich a little too widely. She spiked the blue orb into the ground, and for a brief second nothing happened. Suddenly, the ground began shifting and bulging, as first undead limbs, then entire raised corpses began to emerge by the dozens from beneath the soil. Some still had quite a bit of flesh and muscle on their bodies, while some were little more than skeletons. Spiking the green orb at the center of the zombie horde, they were all suddenly equipped for combat and the know-how to boot. The moaning, groaning mass lumbered towards Abigail, but if the witch was worried, she didn't show it. Instead, she simply held out her left hand in a finger snap position. Ah, the Lich with temper issues, we meet again. I thought you'd have learned something from our last encounter, but it seems I must teach you another lesson. She snapped her fingers. But whatever she seemed to be expecting to happen failed to materialize. She snapped twice more, as if to confirm something was indeed awry, before glaring at Midori, who was now fully garbed in the robes of her lich form. Oh, that trick? She laughed. I'm well and truly over my hatred for Emiko now. There might have been a few embers to rekindle back in Salem, but they've been adequately quenched. No, right now, the only one I hate is you. A brief expression of panic crossed Abigail's face as the horde was now in striking distance, but it was quickly replaced with a look of smug amusement. You might not be so easy to manipulate now. But what of your brainless troops, She clicked her fingers, and a wave of red energy passed over Midori's forces. As one, they slowly turned to face her and began to shamble their way forward. Having no other option, Midori deactivated her resurrection spell, and the corpses faded back into the dirt from whence they'd come. Thinking herself victorious, Abigail began to approach the cave entrance, only for a well-placed bullet from Masato's rifle to strike her dead at center in the middle of her forehead. She fell over and hit the ground like so much dead weight. Cautiously, Elizabeth and Midori approached her as Iris finally returned to the battlefield. Whoa, is she dead? Asked Iris, whistling in surprise. And this is where you put on, if a cause is worth dying for, then be, from the same movie. Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0. So, yeah. Hardly. All eyes snapped to the ground where Abigail was rising up into the air, hair flowing ominously outward, the sclera of her eyes now fully black. For whatever it may be worth, angrily growled the witch through gritted teeth. No one has forced my hand like this in a long, long time. Now die. It was as if all of the shadows that night began to slither, creep, crawl, and scuttle towards the witch, who hovered just out of range. The only thing replacing the shadows was even more darkness, which seemed to feed the entity that quickly began to form under her. A lumbering stone golem made of pure darkness, as black as the void, with an ethereal aura of violet shadow coursing across its body. It had to be nearly 30 feet tall, nearly 2/3 that in width, and perhaps half that still in depth. It was simple in shape, created from rectangular objects arranged into the vaguest outline of a humanoid form. It had no head, however, and its arms were comprised of a series of segmented blocks which could morph from a tentacle or whip shape into a proper fist, albeit ones with only 3 fingers. The golem swung at Midori, who was hit dead on, her limbs sent flying almost comically. Careful, Bonnie. Almost comically. It slowly turned its attention to where Masato still lay under her camouflage, and raised its other arm to crush the hillock back into the plane, but she managed to roll out of the way just in time. Inside the cave, Usako and the team were starting to panic a little as the entire place began shaking and caving in some places, only barely prevented by the joint efforts of Nonami and Hyoka, creating pillars of their elements to reinforce the roof. "What's going on out there?" "How do we beat that?" yelled Iris in genuine panic. This was way out of the scope of things her father had intended for her to deal with. But she couldn't just run. No, she had to protect Takibana from this thing, if nothing else. If she died on Iris's watch, Aramana's wrath would be... She didn't want to think about it. "Yeah, any ideas? Because I'm fresh out," added Masato, sidling up next to Elizabeth. "Just one. Follow what I do to the letter." The Dhampir stomped her right foot 3 times rather roughly into the ground, grinding once with her left foot. She then turned about face and began to run for her life. "Oh, you're not kidding me, right?" "Oh, wait, she's saying, "Oh, you're not kidding me, right?" roared Iris as she and the others followed suit. Misato made certain to grab Midori's head in the chaos, so the lich wouldn't be left behind. If everything turned out okay, they could always come back for the rest of her body later. Besides, they'd done their job at least, and stalled for time. They'd cost Abigail at least 15 minutes into the 8 p.m. hour, and it would take her another 10 just to wiggle her way into the veil chamber. Maybe more, given the damage her friend did. From below, within the main chamber, Nonami stood with her ear to the wall, nearest the entrance. Elizabeth would be using a certain strike on the ground as her signal that the fight was coming their way, and it didn't take long for Nonami's keen ears to hear the familiar 4 consecutive beats. Thud, 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 scratch. It was a strategy the 2 bloodsuckers had developed years back, and one that still worked even today, albeit a bit differently due to Nonami's new affinity with earth and stone. "Get ready," whispered Nonami, just audible enough to be heard. "She'll be here in minutes." True to her word, it only took Abigail a few minutes to make the trek from the cave entrance to the antechamber. Her smaller form allowed her to traverse the now half-collapsed tunnel easier than it had been for the others. Even then, she still had to crawl for part of the trek. She entered the chamber, half covered in dirt, that disappeared when she returned to her true form once more. The instant she got to her feet, Sarah unleashed a Category 6 hurricane on the witch, blasting her back into the wall. Stunned and a bit shaken, as she genuinely hadn't been expecting such an immediate assault, Abigail tried to regain her bearings. She was not to be given the chance. It was in that moment when Nonami called upon the earth to rise up in a wave over Abigail, which Hyoka then saturated deeply with water to create a massive mud pile, which she subsequently flash froze. Without missing a beat, it was Usako and the rest's turn. and they unleashed hell on the restrained Abigail. Torrents of flame and bursts of electricity flowed through the air and into the witch as beams of light and magic intermingled between them and amplified their power. The barrage of elemental energies continued for nearly 5 minutes until Nonami called for them to stop, though she hardly needed to, as everyone present was just about drained. We did it! Grinned Usuko, holding the lance over her head in triumph. For a single brief moment, it did indeed look that way. Then the charred, earthen cocoon exploded outwards, sending chunks of stone sailing through the chamber, several of them striking Usuko's friends. One very large chunk seemed to almost directly target her, or more specifically, her new arm. The force of the impact shattered the delicate internal mechanisms, and it fell to the ground with a crash, the lance rolling limp from its now lifeless hand. Credit where it's due. That was quite the display, grinned Abigail as she emerged more or less unharmed from the smoking crater. A bit dirty, her clothes a bit singed, but she herself had nary a scratch. But ultimately a fruitless endeavor. I will thank you, though, as you've brought me the very thing I need to finish my plans. Without a care in the world, Abigail strutted towards where the lance had rolled and bent down to pick it up. I couldn't have done this without you, Tachibana, truly. Oh, certainly at first I didn't need the lance's power for this, but when you and your friends ran me out of town yesterday, you severely limited my options. You know, it's almost funny. If you hadn't come here tonight, I wouldn't be able to do this now. She reached down and closed her fingers around the grip of the bat. But that was when something incredible happened, and this is where you start kachidaze. I think, is that what it's called? Or Ultimate Battle. Yeah, Ultimate Battle from Dragon Ball Super. The bat began to disintegrate into a flurry of what seemed to be pink flower petals, swirling through the air and towards where Usuko stood weakly, her shoulder nub outstretched as if her arm were reaching out towards the bat. The petals swirled and twisted their way from Abigail and to Usuko, congregating on her shoulder and coalescing into a brand new arm. When the last of the fingers had come into existence, a ring of light sailed up the length of the new arm, causing it to glow with an almost divine radiance. The ring didn't end at her shoulder, however. It traveled the length of her body, healing her and bringing out her seraphim form. Her eyes, blue and glowing, stared hard into Abigail's, and for a moment neither spoke, simply waiting for the other to make a move. Abigail was faster, both arms outstretched in Usuko's direction. From just above her palms formed two magic circles, with intricate and esoteric designs. From these fired energy blasts, which Usuko dodged effortlessly, and suddenly the two were face to face. With a shout, Usuko planted her glowing fist into Abigail's stomach. "I'm gonna put you down, you bitch!" she growled. "You want my bat? Come and take it!" Before she could open her palm and allow a blast of energy to rip through Abigail's guts, the witch used Usuko's chest as a springboard and flipped back out of her reach. "How about I take it from your corpse?" growled Abigail right back, a series of much larger magical circles appearing from behind her, all of which fired at Usuko's friends rather than Usuko herself. Acting sheerly on instinct, Usuko managed to intercept all of the blasts save for one, which struck Nonami hard in the leg. "You're gonna pay for that!" From Usuko's back, on the tips of her 6 wings formed magic circles nearly identical to the ones her foe had created moments before. However, instead of magica bursts firing from the center of each circle, instead came 6 identical shotgun barrels, which each proceeded to open up with full auto fire upon the Pinkette's dazed and confused foe, who only barely managed to survive the onslaught by diving behind a large rock. She wasn't showing it, but Abigail was starting to panic. Tachibana was just as strong as she had guessed, maybe more so, and she was mad. These abilities of her, she'd never seen anything like it. Was this truly what an angel was capable of? Will I really have to do this twice in one day? She wondered aloud. Fine, it won't matter anyhow when all is done. Once more, all of the shadows in the area began slithering and scuttling towards where Abigail stood. Once more, the shadow golem reformed, albeit smaller. From within the golem, Abigail was able to control its movements as though it were a mech. "You won't ruin decades of preparation!" she roared through the golem's mouth. "I won't let you!" She began pursuing Usuko, who, to her credit, was quick enough to dodge the hulking behemoth now assaulting her. Running wasn't something she'd ever been good at, but now she found herself jogging along the curved wall of the cave, desperately avoiding blows from the shadow golem. Finally, as she managed to get around to its backside, she found a weak point, a gap in the armor that revealed a glowing green energy core. Usuko took aim, a golden sphere of light forming within her palms, and fired. Divine Cannon! The blast of holy light erupted from her palms and cascaded over the golem, which was destroyed in an instant. Abigail, however, seemed relatively unfazed. Annoyed, irritated, frazzled, and angry? Oh, certainly. Nettled? Absolutely. Fazed? Harmed? Oh no, not at all. Usuko, we can't beat her, groaned Nonami. Keep her at bay. Seal her in. Usuko shook her head. There's one thing we haven't tried yet. Not really. We need to combine our powers. Not use them together, but hit her with raw elemental energy. It's how the ancients beat Aramanes, after all. Nonami stared at Usuko, arrayed in golden light and gleaming armor, looking for all the world like a real angel. How do you know that's... No, it doesn't matter right now. If you're sure it will work, then let's do it. Everyone, combine your elemental energies, shouted Usuko to her friends. Hit her with everything you got left. No, don't, she yelled, her eyes suddenly wide in terror. You can't, you fools, you don't understand. But they ignored her. Each girl, in turn, extended their weapons out and fired large beams of pure elemental power at Abigail. Glowing red energy from Rei's burning Kanabo. Crackling yellow energy from Emiko's Mjolnir 2. Rumbling orange energy from Nonami's Quakebreaker. Howling green energy from Sarah's Vortex Scythe. Flowing blue energy from Hyoka's Super Glock. And finally, glowing white gold energy from Usuko's right arm, the Lance of Longinus. Everything they had left in them was being used in this final assault. When struck, Abigail was instantly frozen in place, not by ice, but by a crystalline substance which began growing up and out from both her feet and chest. As she screamed in protest, pleaded for them to stop, even threatening to kill them and everyone they loved. But her words did no good, and soon the crystal cut them off permanently. Finally, when their powers were truly exhausted, the beam stopped, and Abigail stood there, frozen in space and time, in a wall of crystal. Emiko was the first to speak. Is she... Nay, replied Sarah, now in her orb form to conserve what little energy she had left. But she's not exactly alive, either. She's been put into carbon freeze, giggled Hyoka, also an orb now. Perfect hibernation. Yeah, kinda, smiled Usuko weakly, her form reverting back to normal now that the threat had subsided. Her arm had apparently returned, though the lance was nowhere to be seen. Had it become part of her now? Would she still be able to call on its power when she needed it? Did it even matter at this point? I don't want to, brag or anything, but you do know we, just saved the world, right? Grinned Rei, nursing a black eye from where a rocket struck her pretty hard. I suppose we did, smiled Nonami, limping a little towards Rei, who picked her up and put the vampire on her back like a child riding piggyback. Suddenly, from the Abigail crystal, came a powerful burst of energy, which resonated throughout the chamber for a moment before seemingly vanishing. Everyone thought she was breaking free and proceeded to fall into combat stances as best they could manage. But as there were no further aftershocks, the burst was assumed to be harmless. At the same time as the burst, the veil began to flicker and fade for a brief moment as the clock struck 9 p.m. They'd done it. They really had saved the world. Of course, in the months to come, they'd realize this moment was the true prelude to chaos.
This really was a war of the yokai.
Yes, I had to do the title drop. Sue me. Sue me! In the Gardner Medical Wing, room 217, a certain pink-haired girl lay in a never-ending coma, one she'd been trapped in ever since being brought back to life by her older sister. There was a momentary shudder. One felt around the world, and then... Kuriko's eyes slowly began to flutter open, and she tried to take in her surroundings. The last thing she remembered, she had been run through by a tree monster. She could remember briefly seeing her mom, then Usuko, and then now. She tried to call out for someone, but her throat had grown hoarse from disuse. Instead, she found a call button on the side of her bed and pressed it. In an instant, Madrid was in the room, her face aglow with excitement and relief. She had many questions for Kuriko, but the younger Pinkette had only one for Madrid, once she'd been given a glass of water and some time to find her voice.
Where's Usuko?
Back in Ireland, Usuko was resting on a rock, having now since reverted to her regular form. From her pocket, she could feel a buzzing. Odd, considering she'd left her phone in the hotel room. Reaching in, she pulled out the pager Dr. Kuma had given her several months ago when the Pinkette had left for New Atlantis. Now scrolling across the LCD screen were but 2 words. 2 simple words in black digital text against the bright green display. 2 words Usuko wanted to see more than anything, and ones that brought tears to her eyes instantly. Kuriko's awake. November 1st. Misato returned to her hotel room, a bit bruised and battered, but no more the worse for wear. She'd managed to use some surgical threads she'd had on her to stitch Midori back together, and the Lich's regeneration abilities could finish the job from there. Now that she was in her room and could relax, she thought about all that had transpired as of late. She had finally come to accept that the Usuko of this timeline wasn't a bad person at all. That events had unfolded differently enough to change the future, and for the first time in probably 10 years, Misato actually smiled. Her joy was cut short as an all too familiar woman stepped out from the closet. Her short silver-pink hair was kept prim and proper, and her bangs were meticulously trimmed to a flat edge. This is where you would probably want to put... For now, I'm using this as her OST, is the Stroheim's theme from JoJo, Part 2. So, yeah. I just feel it kind of fits her aesthetic. At least the beat of it. I don't know about the lyrics. Probably not. But, yeah. She was only slightly taller than Misato, but to the half-oni, she was practically a giant, sheerly from how intimidating she was. "And so I finally find you, Misato," sneered the evil Usuko. "I admit, you were tougher to track down than I anticipated. Though, I suppose I had been expecting you to still have your real hair color. It's quite cute how you took on Emi-chan's. A tribute, perhaps?" "What? How are... No, this isn't possible!" Utsuko grabbed Misato by the throat and held her up to her face effortlessly. "Oh, I assure you, it was quite possible. I'd been going back and forth through time for a while before you ruined everything." Seeing the confusion on her estranged daughter's face, Utsuko continued. "The method of time travel you used erases the future. Everything past the present you're going to, because none of it will exist anymore without a tether to your original time. You were my tether, you damnable thing. It was your presence in the future that allowed me to return whenever I wished. That is, until you went back yourself and severed that link. Now we're both stranded here, and our future, my future, is lost. All that I struggled to build, all that I worked towards, gone! Reduced to nothing by the actions of an idiot child, meddling with forces she can't even begin to understand. Masato tried to struggle free of Atsuko's grip, but to no avail. Her mother was just too strong. But what? What are you waiting for? She gasped. If you want your revenge, just take it. I don't care anymore. Actually, I was actually strangling myself for that, reading that. Method acting. The evil version of Usuko just laughed and laughed, which disturbed Masato far more than death threats would have. Kill you? No, far from it, Masato Takibana, she chided, releasing her grip and sending the girl sliding to the floor. I'm going to make sure you've come all this way for nothing, my dear child. You're going to watch as I steer her back onto the path towards her ascension, and there's nothing, not a damn thing you can do about it. She will rebuild my empire for me. And once she has, and you've seen all your hopes die before your eyes, I'll gut her and take her place. Isn't that lovely? I'll warn her, wheezed Masato, backing away. I'll tell her you're here, and Atsuko only laughed harder. She already knows I exist. Farewell for now, Masato Takibana. We'll see each other again soon. In a flash of light, she was gone, and the battle-hardened Masato let out a wail of anguish from the depths of her soul. The one thing she'd hoped for, the reason she decided to sacrifice everyone she'd loved in her time, was so that Usuko would die with them. Only now, even that had failed, it seemed. What could she do at this point? Things truly felt more hopeless than they'd ever had before. Epilogue. Karako! Usuko and friends had finally returned to Japan. Masato had seemingly vanished after the events of that night, but Usuko felt confident she'd turn up again. She'd hoped so, at least. Both her and Emiko had talked about going out and doing things together as a family. Give her a taste of the childhood she hadn't gotten. Elizabeth and her shade friend had gone to locate the final elemental key, located somewhere in South America. She had told Nonami this before she'd left, and it seemed the Dhampir and Nonami had finally begun to make amends with one another. Elizabeth had told her that she had a plan to use the remaining keys to try and seal Aramana's power, though hadn't mentioned how exactly. Iris had offered to accompany her, and Elizabeth had allowed it, surprisingly enough. Iris wasn't sure why she felt compelled to accompany the Dhampir. After all, she was working against the dragon's own father, but... well, Iris wasn't altogether sure anymore she wanted to work for him. She enjoyed the human world and had even made a couple friends here now. If Aramana's had his way, it would all be wiped out. Midori had returned to Gardena America to resume her duties as Cryptid Ranger Pink. She had learned a couple spells from Usuko during their brief time together and was going to try and practice them to make herself stronger. She also wanted to say her goodbyes to her mentor, Grigori, on her own time. She hadn't gotten a chance back in Salem and had missed the funeral service due to her involvement in the Abigail case. Now back home in Fumizaki, the very first thing Usuko had done was to rush to HQ and into her sister's room, where she sat in bed. Sakura had been looking after her ever since she'd woken up, and nearly jumped out of her skin when Usuko practically burst through the doors in her excitement to see her sister again. For several long, tearful moments, the Takibana sisters exchanged one powerful and happy hug. Kuriko had almost not even recognized her sister at first from how much she'd changed since New Atlantis, but only for a brief moment and nothing more. I'm so glad you're okay, smiled Usuko, tears of joy raining down her face. I've missed you so much, Kuro.
Oh, Usuko,
grinned Kuriko through equally watery eyes.
I'm always right by your side. Always.
Into the room walked Dr. Kuma, a clipboard in hand on which were recorded Usuko's medical charts. Ah, Kuriko, it would seem you're fit as a fiddle now. You may even go home tonight if you wish, assuming you have the ability to do so. Kuriko glanced at her sister as well as her cousin and smiled.
I think I do. Thank you for everything, Doctor.
With the tulpa threat now well and truly taken care of, it was at last time for Hyoka and Junji to take their honeymoon. There was one simple matter left to handle, though. The reception. They'd previously had a room rented at a local hotel, but had been forced to cancel the reservation after the attack at the wedding. Though the rest of Fumizaki at large didn't know the specifics of what had gone down there, it had been high profile enough to have been the talk of the town for several weeks after. Without a place to host it, Hyoka had gotten despondent about the possibility of their reception, until Usuko had a bright idea. Well, why not have it in the penthouse? With Kuriko up and around again, we're moving back into our apartment with Emmy, so it'll be empty again. What do you say? That would be lovely, Miss Takibana, replied Junji. Hyochi, what do you think? Hyoka was fumbling her hands, clearly more than a little nervous, and looked up at Usuko.
I would love that, Usuko, but I have a bigger request, if you don't mind.
Usuko nodded, and Hyoka sidled up next to her and whispered into her ear. Usuko's eyes went wide. You want me to sing at your reception? Exclaimed a shocked Usuko. I mean, of course, but why me? Hyoka giggled, her nervousness fading.
Well, I've heard you're pretty good for one, and there's really just one song, okay? It's one that means a lot to me and Junji. Could ya?
It didn't even take Usuko a second to decide. Of course she would. That night, in the penthouse room with all their friends present, Usuko looked out into the crowd, mic in hand. For a moment, she locked eyes with Hyoka, and both girls smiled. Then as the sounds of bells and piano began drifting through the air, Usuko opened her mouth and began singing the lyrics to Hyoka and Junji's special song. Hold on a second. 不思議だね今の気持ち空から降ってきたみたい And that is where the book ends. That is the end of War of the Yokai, Book 5, Winds of Change. I didn't need to look that up. But yeah, that's it. That's Book 5. I hope you enjoyed it. I think this is one of the best ones I've done so far after Winter Snow, I think. Also the single longest out of all of these, because books 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 are both in of themselves novel length, whereas Winds of Change, Book 5, is novel length in and of itself. So, yeah. But, yeah. So, since this is the last part, I guess we can talk about stuff. I'd like to know what you thought about it. I think that all the technical problems I've had ever since we revealed Abigail's identity, I think this might be a little cursed. Because, yeah, but I don't know. Hope not. I really hope not. That'd be bad. But, yeah, well, certainly things will get interesting going forward now that we know that Altsuko You know, she's not a tulpa. That's the evil future Usato. She's here. And she's fucking evil. Ooh, I said the F word again, I'm sorry. Ah! But yeah, yeah, things are gonna get things are gonna start to heat up going forward. Speaking of going forward with these audiobooks. Now, again, I'm currently, as I'm recording this, I'm a bit into book 6, but I'm probably not even halfway. Now, this will probably be coming up in June at the earliest, probably July. So by then, maybe we'll be a lot further along. But there's probably going to be another kind of stall for book 6, because first I have to write it. Then I have to do, weekly chapter uploads. And then, post them. Then we have to record and post. So you might not be getting book 6 audiobook until next year, or very, very late into this year. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll get the writing bug will bite me on the butt, and I'll get book 6 knocked out by the time. But even then, like, there's still weekly chapter uploads. So yeah, no, we're looking at close to 2020. We're looking at close to 2023 before the next audiobook goes up. But there's still plenty of Reiko content here. There's always going back over the old ones if you want to give them another listen. I am considering re-recording them, because at least the first couple books, probably all of them, just because, the voice. As much as we love Squeakbox Reiko, Plus, the first 2 or 3 books, I recorded those from Twitch streams, so there's a lot of, like, interference or me getting distracted by chat or what have you, even though I did my best not to. So I'm thinking of doing that. And in fact, I did kind of experiment with, like, 30-minute bites with book 1, so I might continue that. But, well, you might know already, because I might have already put those up. Because, again, content. But, again, virtual novel stuff, that'll probably be well underway. And I want to say, not part 1, but part 2 of the virtual novel, Terra Firma and Isolated Waters, specifically the Isolated Waters portion, will have a celebrity voice guest. I'm not saying who. Or I should say, it'll have at least one, because we might have more by then. I don't know. But it's going to be at least one. Won't say who. Won't spoil it. Let's just say I was dancing at work today, literally dancing at work today, when they responded to me and said, yeah, I'll do it. So, look forward to that. But yeah, until we meet again, until you see these lovely ladies again in book 6, oh, maybe I could drop a teaser at least. No, we'll leave it a surprise. But let's just say, it's par for the course. For better or worse, it's par for the course. Is that rhyme? Worse, course? No. Okay. Anyway, good night, y'all. Take care. Have a good one. And until next time, bye, Nara.